Welcome back. I'm here with remote viewer Lyn Buchanan. Welcome back, Lyn, and thank you again for spending your valuable time on this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. Hope we did some good.
Yeah, I hope so too. So I have a question for you that's it might come out of the blue, but in the last episode, we talked about an encounter you had with the quote unquote men in black. Have you ever had any other encounters?
Oh, well, yeah. This will give you a little history. I had 12 years break in service from my first service to when I went back in. And I was a minister, Methodist minister in college, college and the ministry. And I was the pastor of a little church that's way, way out in the country in deep East Texas, piney woods and all that. And one night, I was moving from one church to another. The Methodist ministers move from church to church each year, And so I was getting ready to move. My family had already moved to the new parsonage. I was just cleaning up the old parsonage and had everything into the U-Haul. And it was late at night, so I made out a pallet in the living room floor, laid down. And as soon as I laid down, I was wide awake still. I heard this sound of something landing in the backyard. Now, the parsonage there is a quarter mile off the road. And yet something was landing in the backyard. And I thought, it's a strange sounding helicopter. If it's a helicopter, but what else could it be?
Yeah, what did it sound like, actually, if you could describe the sound?
I think the best description of it, which is still not accurate, would be, have you ever, as a kid, put a balloon to where it rubbed in the spokes of your tires as you went along, as you rode your bike?
Yeah.
That's the closest sound I can think of. And so I started to get up and go to the back door to see what was going on back there. And I couldn't move. I was just frozen. And so I was laying there trying to move. I was wide awake and I was getting kind of scared, actually. And I heard some footsteps coming around the grass along the side of the house and up to the front of the house to the window. I couldn't move, so I couldn't see who it was. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting in this pale colored room in a row of seats. There was a row of seats behind me, and it was filled with people. And there were three people over on my left. The one next to me was this old lady. And then I was sitting there, and there were a few seats to my right and a window. And I realized I must be on some kind of a plane or something. And so I turned to the woman to my left, and she was just frozen. She was just scared and couldn't move or anything. And this alien walked into the room, big, huge, muscled up guy, well over 6 feet tall, almost pale white skin, walked into the room. And when I fly, I get kind of claustrophobic, so I always fly by the window. I always get a window seat. He came in, and I said, "Excuse me, can I sit by the window?" And he jerked around and looked at me like, uh-oh, somebody let the lions loose. And he turned around and just ran out. And a few minutes later, this little gray came with three of these big guys crowding behind him, trying to keep him between me and them.
What do these guys have hair? Were they like?
No.
So it sounds like a description of tall whites. maybe with a gray.
I had never heard of tall whites before, and but
So
that's what I was describing.
chalky white skin, really
Oh, yeah.
tall,
Yeah.
either no hair or very, very thin, like white
Yeah.
hair. Okay, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But
Well, the gray started talking to me, and I would find myself dozing, and then I would snap back to. And finally, the gray said, "Look, we can't leave you here. Come up in front with me." And so I went up in front. He was the pilot. I kneeled down beside him, and when I kneeled down on the floor, my eyes were level with his. And he was showing me how to do the controls of the ship and all that. And actually, it was very friendly. And when we got to wherever we went, it was very dark, extremely dark place. But it was daytime. The sun was out, but it was very, very dim and off color. And there was this path that went up to a pavilion. And they led the other people up to the pavilion. And the gray told me, "You don't want to go up there." So he and I sat down on this hillside. The grass was black. And I kept hearing these sounds from up on the hill. And from the sounds, I agreed. I didn't want to go up there. When they came back down, we all got back onto the ship. And I turned to him and I said, "I would like to remember this." And he said, "You won't." All I remembered of this whole incident was waking up the next morning there, standing at the back door of the house, not really understanding why I was standing at the back door. I thought, did I sleepwalk? What? When I finally realized, oh, yeah, I'm heading to the new parsonage today, I went back in, got the pallet, threw it in the U-Haul, and drove off. From that day on, for about the next 25 years, I couldn't leave the house without thinking, I've forgotten something. About 25 years later, we were going to church one morning, and we got in the car, my wife and I got in the car, and I said, "I have forgotten something. I've forgotten something." And I went back, and she was accustomed to this. And I went back and checked the house. I hadn't forgotten anything. I came out and I said, "I've forgotten something." And she said, "Did you check the basement?" "Yes." "Did you check the stove?" "Yes." "Did you check the electricity?" "Yes, I did." And she started making fun of me, and she said, "And did you check the backyard?" And when she did, the whole memory of it came back. And I mean, it just flooded back and just hit me like a brick. And I thought, where did all this come from? This never happened. And so anyway, I was in the military unit at the time, the remote viewing unit. So I just wrote down some encrypted coordinates for the time and place back in Midway, Texas, where I was a minister. And
did you give it to somebody else?
Huh?
Did you give it to somebody else without telling them what
I gave it to the other viewers as a practice target, and they all found what I remembered. And I thought, well, maybe it's just telepathic overlay. It can't be real. And so anyway, Ed Dames was there at the time, and Ed Dames was doing some outside work with another unit. I'd come to find out later. And he reported me. He reported the incident. So about a week later, I was up at the Defense Intelligence Agency up on the 7th floor going to the director's office. Two men in black stepped out into the hallway, pointed into a small conference room, and I had learned to recognize all of this. I went into the conference room. They had two chairs facing each other, and one of the guys sat over to the side. One of the guys sat right in front of me and started asking me these questions. And I realized immediately he's asking about UFOs. And so I thought, well, they want to find out if somebody with my secret clearance, with my level of clearances, has gone bonkers. But just answer the question. That's all they're there for. Just answer the question. They were concerned with the control panel of the UFO. And he would ask the questions, all these 10 different questions in different ways. Finally, about the third time he asked about the control panel, I said, no, let me explain it. And I explained how it worked. The guy over to the left slapped his knee and he said, so that's it.
So these guys are, I'm reading into this, so the audience with the greatest
What
salt.
I read into it was he's got one who didn't know how to fly it.
Yeah, they're trying to reverse engineer it, and they have questions on it.
And so I looked back at the interrogator who made no response. I grinned, and his ears got just beet red. It was an automatic thing. He couldn't control that. And within about 20 seconds, they were both gone, and I was sitting there in the room by myself. And I thought, well, maybe it was real. I still didn't want to believe it. About a year later, we had an assignment to go out to a facility in New Mexico. And while we were there, I was in the cafeteria, and this old Army buddy walked in. And I said, hey, what are you doing here? He said, I can't tell you. What are you doing here? I said, I can't tell you. And so we got to talking, and he finally said, what's your clearance? And I told him. He said, oh, well, I probably can tell you, but we're going to have to check your clearance. They checked it. He took me out to where he worked. And it was a building that was full of, it was a hangar that was full of airplane wreckage. And he was showing me how they put the planes back together to tell about air collisions, mid-air collisions, and all that. And I looked down, and a piece of the wreckage that was there was the control panel out of one of these UFOs. And I said, that's out of a UFO, isn't it? And it just echoed in that hangar. There was this major who came running out, cussed me out, threatened me with death or worse, and gave me the bum's rush out of there. And at that point, I realized that actually happened.
Where was this? Like what? Where in the United States? Okay. I can ask. I can ask. You can always tell me no.
It was in New Mexico. Yeah.
So the control panel, what aspect of the control panel were they focused on? Well, actually, let me step back. Can you describe it?
Yeah. The one that was there had like a 6-fingered handprint with holes at different points in that handprint. The one that was on the ship that I was on had a sort of a inverse triangle. And a triangle this way. And there was a center row of lights and holes on both sides going out, to form the triangle. And whenever something got out of alignment, one of these lights would drift off to a side. And you would put your finger over a hole, and the light would come back to that hole. And then you put your finger to the next one in, it would come back in, and whatever was wrong would correct itself, and you would just sort of lead it back to where it was, all the lights were in the center. And this is what I explained to them. He said, so you put your hand on the light, right? And I said, no, you put your hand on the one, on the hole closest to the center, from the light and you wait for the light to come under your finger. And that's when the guy slapped his leg and said, "So that's it."
So he was likely figuring out just how to fly it as opposed to how to reverse engineer it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was really about the only other time I've had an interrogation with a men in black,
So we're gonna get into speculation here, but what do you think that we know that's the rest of the public doesn't?
About what?
About these sorts of encounters, events, right? Where
About the UFOs? Oh, quite a bit. Yeah, a whole lot. Yeah. But the men in black aren't just UFOs. They're there to get intelligence that's needed by different units of the government, different branches of the government, and all that. They're professional interrogators.
so you probably can't answer this, but I'll ask and you just tell me yes or no. Are they part of the civilian intelligence establishment, the military intelligence establishment, or an altogether different entity?
I can give you a definite answer on that one. I have no idea and not asking.
Okay.
I wouldn't ask, No, when I realized, this is a men in black situation, I knew you don't ask questions.
And how did you know one was an interrogator and then one was the intelligence consumer?
At one previous time, not in the remote viewing unit, but at one previous time in my military career, I went out as the one who's the consumer. So I was familiar with it. What was going on.
Okay. And then how did you get linked up with that interrogator? Was it just you had a question and they said, well, this person's just going to show up?
I didn't have the question. I was basically told what information was needed, what questions would be asked and by the interrogator, and go with him. Report here, go with him, take orders on the fly, whatever the man says to do it.
You were actually a man in black informally for a moment, for like a mission.
Just one thing, and I just mentally sat there and took notes, came back and reported what was said. And I, at the time, really didn't know what I was reporting information on. They just said, "Okay, what did the guy say?" And I said, and I'm sure the interrogator turned in his report. And what did you observe? And okay, you're dismissed. That was it.
Was it UFO related or was it just some other intelligence matter?
I am pretty sure it was just some other intelligence matter. There was no UFO talk or anything like that. So
now going back to your story, and again, we're going to engage in some speculation, but you said you heard sounds from that pavilion. What do you think was going on there?
I don't know. I would hear one person screaming like, in pain and all that. And everybody else was just uproariously laughing. And then everything would go quiet. And then I'd hear another person screaming and everybody would start laughing. Then it would go quiet. Then another person would start screaming. Everybody would start laughing. And just whatever the screaming was about, I don't know. I was talking to the little gray, asking him questions. He was providing me with answers.
Was it verbally or telepathically?
I think it was telepathically. I never I don't remember ever seeing his mouth move, but I know it was very clear communication.
Words, images, or
Words, as I remember. If you've read Jim Marr's book, Alien Agenda,
yeah, I have it on the shelf over there. Yeah.
He has a whole section about that encounter. While on the way to wherever we were going, I was kneeling down beside the grave, asking him questions about how he was working the thing. And I said, well, can I try it? And he said, well, your hands, he said, human hands aren't big enough. Well, I have very large hands. And so I put my hand up like this. He put his hand up like this, and they were roughly the same size. So he said, okay, you can try it. And I mean, he stood over me like daddy letting the kid take the wheel of the car for a while, you know? And I mean, he was standing over me, ready to grab, you know? And I evidently didn't do too bad, but the lights were going off to the side, and I was doing like this, you know? And as we sat there on the hillside, I was asking him questions. And one of the questions I asked was, you know, what are these implants you're putting in? And he was kind of confused about it. And so I told him, you know, we're finding things in there. And he said, oh, no, we take our diseased tissue. He said, we're a medical unit. We take our diseased tissue. We picked up all kinds of diseases in space, and we take our diseased tissue. You humans are antibody factories, and we plant it into you. We come back and abduct you again and take the antibodies, and that's what we use to create the medicine to treat our people. And he said, and you people won't be still. The tips of our instruments break off. And he said, the only thing implanted in there is a couple of cells, you know, diseased cells around that tip. He said, have your people ever looked at the cells around the tip? And I said, no, they cut in, they find a piece of whatever, and they take it out. And he said, no, what we implanted was the cells that are around the tip. He said, you people won't be still. The tips keep breaking off. As we were sitting there, he called in another one. There were two other ships that had landed, and he called in someone that was evidently higher grade than he was. And the guy came and sat down on the hill behind me, said, put up your hand. I put up my hand. He put his hand on the back of mine. And that was the last thing I remembered of that, even after I remembered the whole thing. And so anyway, a couple of years later, I went to a hypnotherapist that I knew did not believe in UFOs, period, and had him carry me through the experience. And it turns out that evidently what happened was he offered me a job as a pilot because I could work the controls. My hands were big enough. And that I had said, good, I'll go get my family. I accepted, I'll get my family. He said, no, you can't have your family. And I said, then I can't go. And so evidently he left. And I turned down the job.
Do you think this has anything to do with kind of these missing 411 stories? There's this guy, David Paulides, particularly in national parks. It happens a lot near boulder fields, near water. And the profile of people who disappear is either they're disabled or they're highly intelligent. And they can't really, they can never find these people, or they rarely find these people. Also, oddly enough, German nationals is another category.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't
You know that.
no explanation why.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of theories about it. But the question is if you had said yes, what would have happened? Would you just disappeared?
I guess so. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah, they wouldn't have brought me back. Yeah.
How often do you think something like this happens?
I think it probably happens more often than is reported, because I know it took me 25 years to even remember that it happened. And then I didn't believe it.
And what did the hypnotherapist do? Because if he or she was highly skeptical, how did it come out in your session? And what did
He just walked me through an event. And I said, an event happened. I don't remember it. Walked me through the event. And he had me sitting on the hillside talking to somebody, and somebody else came up, sat down beside me, and said, put up your hand, and then basically offered me a job as a pilot. So I still don't remember any of that. What I got from that was from the hypnotherapist's report of what I had said and experienced and relived during that hypnosis session. Yeah.
And how did the hypnotist react to that if he didn't believe in it?
He basically thought it was just an event. And I told him later that I'd had this abduction, and that's what it was. And he kind of got ticked off at me for even being there and just dismissed me. Yeah.
Oh, so in other words, he thought it was just like a human pilot,
I guess,
offering you a job.
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow. Now, have you had any memories or events that were similar, or incidents that were similar to this since then that you remember, or is that the only?
That's the only one. Yeah.
Did you get a sense of why they came specifically to your location, or was it just wrong place, wrong time?
Out in the country, way out in the middle of the country, like I say, a quarter of a mile off the nearest road. The only other thing, you were saying high IQ. My Mensa rating is 99.6 percentile. Mensa rates you percentile of intelligence. And I'm at the 99.6 percentile. So, officially a genius and got the document to prove it. That and a cup of coffee won't get you anything.
So what would that, out of, a standard IQ scale, what would that put you at?
I think it's around 149, somewhere around there.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I never have even bothered to look it up. I know that all of these tests are biased in one way or another toward education, toward background, or whatever. And so I've never really taken IQ tests seriously anyway.
Okay. Going back to the unit.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Morehouse talked about a program called Open Search Outward, where you would just be given coordinates, not told anything about it, but your target would ultimately be something off-world. Did you have any experiences with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, there were several we did. Ed liked to give us all these ET targets and UFO targets, and they finally told him to stop doing it, and he didn't. Yeah, we did many of these. They were not tasked by the government, or, they were always considered to be practice targets. And the thing is, if you database a person's work so that you know their dependability rating, then you can give them a target with no feedback and know how much you can depend on it to be correct. And
plus you can correlate it if you send different remote viewers to the same target.
That's right. And one of the standard ones that I think we all did at some time or another was the 4 ET bases on Earth that Pat Price had discovered. And
Say more.
And I did all 4 of those. Yeah.
Can you say more about that? So where were these 4 alleged bases? And by the way, for the audience, Pat Price is one of the original remote viewers, very skilled, worked with SRI, Stanford Research Institute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastically skilled.
And also may have died under mysterious circumstances.
May have died. What was it? The director of intelligence said one time, Pat Price died, nobody's seen him since. But anyway, one of the bases is in Zimbabwe, one's in Alaska, one's in the Pyrenees in Spain, and one's in Mount Hayes in Australia. And we were tasked with not only finding them, but also what is done at each different site. One in Zimbabwe seems to be a repair shop. The one in the Pyrenees, I forget what they do. It's something more mundane. The one in Alaska was a intercept information collection, a spying outfit. The one in Australia was an entry and exit point for ETs coming to and leaving the planet. And they would come there and branch out around the planet from there. Yeah.
Where in Alaska was the alleged base?
Mount Hayes. One in Australia is Mount Zeal. Yeah.
Zeal, Zeal?
Ziel, I think it is.
Ziel. Okay.
Yeah.
And then where were these bases? Are they underground, above ground?
And the one in Zimbabwe seemed to be underground. The others seemed to be in mountains.
And then this is gray, whites.
The one in Australia is the one I did the most on, and there were grays. There were also humans and humanoids, and mainly humans and grays. Yeah.
And when you say humans, do you just mean just similar DNA, or like from other worlds, or like
you couldn't tell them from normal humans. I was observing, and that was it. They were just people walking around doing things, and there were grays among them, But
did you have any indication that they were not from Earth? I mean, was there not a chance that they were from Earth?
I was doing a session, just observing, describing people I saw, and I described some of them as short, gray, and all that, and others as just humans. Yeah. So I don't know. I wasn't further tasked. When you're further tasked, it's called retasking to get more detailed information. And I was never retasked on it. So.
Okay. Any other open search outward missions that you may have had?
Oh yeah. Several. The different planets in the solar system. I was never tasked personally, I don't know if anybody else was, with other solar systems or other galaxies or anything like that, other stars. But I got Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the moons of the different planets and all that. Yeah. But these
Did you see anything? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And living beings. Yeah. And like the history of Mars, too. Like I say, these were never officially tasked through the chain of command, as far as I know. They were always treated as practice targets.
And what did you see on Mars that was interesting?
I saw that any life that's there is underground. I found a place that was underground that had living beings there with atrophied arms and legs they're just no walking around, no doing anything. And over time, over centuries, their arms and legs had sort of atrophied by evolution. There was some stairs going up, and my monitor said, well, take the stairs, see where it leads. I went up, and there was this hallway and sand all over, because down at the end of the hallway was just an opening to the outside, no door or anything like that. And so I went down and leaned out the opening and looked, and it was a sloped side that was fairly smooth, like the side of a pyramid, flat, And I looked out and around and saw different things out there. At the time, the picture of the face on Mars was still classified. So I guess a couple of months after I did that session, I was at a place out in California, and there on the wall was the picture of the Sedona region, face on Mars, and all that. And I looked, and you know how blurry the picture is that went out to the public? Come on, they can read your license plate from 250 miles up. You think they're going to see a mountain and it's going to be blurry? The picture I saw was very clear. And
Because I think they've since written it off as like,
oh yeah,
pareidolia is what they're claiming it is. Right?
Yeah, and they say, see, it's just a mountain.
Yeah,
but you read the caption. This is a computer-generated picture. Okay, from that blurry picture. And so anyway, I looked, and there's this one sloped area that's flat, and there's this little dark spot on it. And, I would never say that I have physically been to Mars. But at a subconscious and experiential level, I keep saying, been there, done that, didn't get the T-shirt.
So when you saw these beings, is that now, or was that in the distant past?
As far as I know, it was now. You tend to default to present time when you remote view, unless your monitor moves you to another time. Yeah.
And when you said that they had atrophied arms and legs, did you describe kind of the beings that you saw in this session?
About my size, maybe smaller, heavy torsos. And like I say, just stubby like arms and legs, faces. But, you could tell that the place was crowded with them. And you could tell that, there used to be arms and legs because they were stubby. But just, I guess, over time of staying in this one underground area, the evolution just atrophied those.
Did they move around, or were they completely sedentary?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Huh. And what state of advancement did you kind of glean from that experience?
I didn't. I was describing what I saw, and I happened to look around and saw some stairs going up. With their atrophied limbs, they could not possibly go up the stairs, so it didn't make any sense at all that there would be stairs. And the monitor said, well, go up the stairs and see what you find. So I did. And I didn't even bother with the beings that were there anymore. There was no communication of any kind with them.
Did they notice you, or do any entities ever? Oh, really?
Yeah, they seem to. Yeah, one of the things about controlled remote viewing is that when you view humans or animals, even they don't notice you, but there are certain of the alien taskings that we got where we were noticed. There at Mount Seal, when I was going through that terminal area with the with them coming in and landing and taking off. I heard this voice and it said, "We know you're here and it's okay. Look around all you want. We don't mind." This same thing happened to Pat Price when he viewed Mount Zeal. They let him know that he knew he was there, and it scared him, and he immediately dropped out of session and quit. But they told me it was okay, and so I kept looking around and taking notes, and drawing sketches and all that.
And so there was another remote viewing set or series of sessions that led, I think, Ed Dames, Morehouse, Mel Riley. I think those three.
Mel is the one I was forgetting. I'm sorry. Mel, yeah.
Where they actually took a physical, like went TDY to Abiquiu, New Mexico. Over the course of a number of nights, it brought them to Pueblo Alto in Chaco Canyon. And in just above Pueblo Alto, they observed a portal that would open and close during the course of a night. They didn't see anything, at least that point, come out of it, but remote viewing sessions had led them to do their reconnaissance there to view it. Do you have any familiarity with that particular?
I wasn't involved in that. I'd heard about it, but I wasn't involved in it. Yeah. Now, I was involved in the MEG experiments, magnetoelectroencephalograph. They took us out to hook us up to these magnetoelectroencephalograph. There's only 5 of them in the world. And they put this big, huge tank right against your skull. And it's like an EEG, except with this one, it can get down to a single synapse in your brain. They can focus it. So instead of getting your overall brainwave patterns, they can focus down to single synapses and all that. They wanted to see what was going on when you remote view. And so what they did was they had us in this Mu metal room. Mu metal blocks out all magnetism, even the Earth's magnetism and all that, and all electronic waves. So it's a electronic magnetic proof room. And they have you on one of these massage tables with your hole, your head in a hole. And they had a mirror that hooked to a link of mirrors that went out of the room. And they would project vertical and horizontal lines of different spacing and all that. And they had the MEG unit going to see on our visual cortex to see how it reacted to these lines. We did that for 20 minutes and then stayed in total darkness for 20 minutes to let everything subside. And then Neville, who was a lab assistant, would sit down at a computer in the far end of the building in the basement. They would show him the lines, and they said, "Remote view Neville, and let's see what you get." And my brainwaves reacted to the lines he was seeing 54%, I think somewhere around 54% of the time, accurately. We had one other woman in the unit. Hers was the highest at 60 some odd. Most of the other people, it was around 30. But it definitely showed the mental access to another person's brain. And this is what they were wanting to figure out. The strange thing was, they would show him vertical lines, and I would get a mental picture of standard birch trees or a picket fence or something like that. They'd show him horizontal lines, and I would get a mental picture of a roadway or traffic or railroad, railroad rails, ties, things like that. And that's when I realized your subconscious has an awareness, and it gives your conscious mind a picture or the closest estimate it can give you of it. And this is what Ingo called analytic overlay, AOLs. So your conscious mind gives you one of these gestalts, and you come out with a noun. So it can have, you get an image of a car, and you write, it's a car. If you jump to that conclusion, you're going to be wrong in everything else. You say, describe the car. It's surrounded by water. It's on the ocean. Your subconscious has simply told you this is a conveyance that carries people, but you jump to the conclusion, oh, it must be a car. And so this became a standard thing in the controlled remote viewing. You describe it, you don't try to identify it. And we found out that when you do that, your accuracy rate goes up really well.
Yeah, it's when you're going through a target and you have an image of, I don't know, Eiffel Tower, right? That's an analytical overlay, right?
Yeah.
Because so if you don't objectify it immediately, it can really color, and that's where remote viewing can go wrong, right? Which is
and it's where psychics go wrong almost all the time. We had a natural psychic come in one time, and we gave him a target, and he said, "I see a large building," and it was true. And in this building, there is a special room that's true, and that was the target. That room was the target. He said, there are people walking around in these white gowns and coveralls, and they have these, white booties on their feet and white hats and these surgical masks on. And in this hospital, I hear screaming and all this other stuff.
It sounds like a semiconductor wafer facility, actually.
That's what it was. It was the clean room at Microsoft. But the minute he said surgical mask, boom, he was, from that on, totally wrong. Yeah.
Interesting.
And this is what natural psychics do. Yeah.
All right. So going back to open search outward, what was the weirdest thing you saw in one of those remote viewing sessions?
One of the moons of Saturn, there was this sort of a cave-like place, and there were two beings in there, and they were holding a conversation. And usually you can get the gist of a conversation, whether you know the language or not that it's in. But this was so absolutely alien that I knew there was a conversation going on. There was zero understanding of what it was about, no concepts of what it was about. It was the most alien thing I have ever even imagined in my whole life. And so I did my report and all this and described them, described the place, described everything I described. But when I tried to find out and describe what they were talking about, it was 100% alien.
What did they look like?
Correlation to it. They were big, sort of very heavy set, very fat, heavy set reptilian type beings. That's how I described it. Yeah. That was the weirdest one. That was the weirdest one I ever got.
What was the scariest one?
Oh, I don't think I've ever had a scary one.
Interesting.
One of the things that you learn is that you're there to observe and not partake. If you start partaking, you can get hurt. I learned very quickly, no matter what it is, because the military targets that we got, some of them were horrendous. Nightmare situations. And I learned very quickly, observe. Don't get involved, And so even if there was a really bad target, I would observe it, report it in session, and that's it. Which is another of my thing of whap, 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 just do the job, move on.
Yeah, don't ask questions. Just
Yeah.
report what you see and don't overthink it.
That's right. Yeah.
So going all the way back to your abduction experience, we didn't really talk about emotions. Like when you kind of woke up and saw this, it sounds like, again, I'm introducing an analytical overlay into this, but
yeah,
it sounds like a tall white. It sounds like
that's how I would describe it. Yeah.
How was your reaction? Like, were you scared? Like, what is going on?
For some reason, I wasn't. I think I was more confused. I didn't know where I was. I realized that I was, in rows of seats with people acting just frozen. And I kind of deduced I was on a plane. I don't know exactly where that came from. And this tall, extremely pale guy came walking through. And I almost won't fly on a plane if I can't get in the window seat. And so I immediately said, "Excuse me, can I sit by the window?" And that's when he panicked and ran out.
Did you see anything out the window?
I never got to sit by the window.
Okay. All right. Any other sessions of note, remote viewing sessions that involve this open search outward that you found particularly interesting?
A few. And as a civilian, after the military, we've done quite a bit of space research for space research organizations. And I don't know, most of that is non-disclosure agreements, but I can talk general theory about it. But no, I found it all to be interesting every time.
Any sense of like a broader kind of interstellar organization, political like arrangements?
Yeah, I never got that. I know people talk about the Galactic Federal Council.
Yeah, I've actually on the CIA's website. There's actually a remote viewing session of someone who reports on something like that. I don't know what to make of it, right? Because unless it's correlated with 7 other things, there's no way to vet it. But
yeah, that's the thing. There's no feedback. I never found any of that. I was never tasked with any of that. One thing I realized is that any intelligent being like that in the remote viewing, they're just more people to me. That's all they are. I go to describe them. Yeah, I'll describe them as, looking like an insect, looking like a praying mantis or something like that. But it's just more people to me. To my subconscious mind, it's just more people.
Yeah, just different form.
Different forms, yeah.
Now, did you ever get a sense, either through remote viewing or just through other means, that there's a technology transfer program between us and ETs?
Yeah. Through other means. I know one of the people who's in charge of one branch of the technology transfer. And I would meet him at times and he'd say, "Lyn, you got to see my new toys."
Do you have a sense for how that works? I would imagine to circumvent FOIA requests, you would place somebody like that in a private company that is subcontracted by the government.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It worked for he's retired now, but he worked for a civilian organization. Yeah.
And what was your sense for, to the extent you discuss it, how that transfer program came about, what sorts of things are being transferred, and why it's not more publicly disclosed.
The last time I saw him, I said, "So what's new?" And he was showing me some of the stuff. And I said, "Well, what are we trading back?" And he kind of chuckled and he said, "This is an old culture we're dealing with, and they've stopped being creative. And they're trading us stuff that to them is very ordinary. And we're taking it and doing all this creative stuff with it and making new inventions." And he said, "These days, what we're trading them is their own stuff back, improved." And he said they're glad to get it. Yeah.
And then do you have a sense for how long this has been going on?
I really don't. He'd obviously been in it for a long time. Yeah.
How does one get in on this racket? It sounds like you can do pretty well with it.
I meet people, and I have always had this thing of hooking people up together with each other. And so I find somebody who has one interest, find another person who is interested in that. And pretty soon they start hooking me up with different people. And, it's social networking. And so I have friends in high places and I have friends in low places.
Yeah, so if you need something,
song, I got friends in low places. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to kneecap somebody. You know who goes it, right? Yeah, I can imagine. Are there any questions about this specific topic that I haven't asked you, but I should have asked you?
Not that I can think of or that I would want asked. It's been a tremendous experience for me. It has been a wild ride. Like I say, this is the most interesting job I ever had in my life. I never expected it.
So funny you mentioned that. So when I was in the military, I was assessed as a military intelligence officer, but they put me as part of the branch detail program.
It's the military, yeah.
Yeah. So I had a degree in electrical engineering from Stanford, and they assessed me in military intelligence, and then they said, "You're going to be on a tank for 4 years."
Yeah.
Right. And that's, it's a highly perishable skill if you're not using it constantly. Yeah. But if I had known that remote viewing may have been an option, it was probably, the program was officially canceled long before I started, not long before, but probably, was it canceled in 95?
Oh, yeah.
So it was canceled 3 years before.
Stargate was.
Stargate. Yeah, right. So, well, actually, that's another follow-up question, but I'll get back to that.
Okay.
But they canceled that particular program 3 years before I started my military service. But if I had known that were an option, I would have stayed in. Instead of just doing 5 years and then out. But yeah. I had no idea that was an option. Now they canceled that program, you said. In your opinion, does the program still exist in the government?
When you retire, they quit telling you secrets. Okay. And so I have to say, I don't know. That's honest. I don't know. I do know that several years ago, long after the unit had been disbanded, there was a thing on the CIA employment list that they advertised for remote viewers. And then it was immediately taken off. It was only there for about 30 minutes to an hour, and went away. So I don't know. I can speculate. The other standard answer I have is that we were good. We saved lives. We saved the government just mega bucks of money. We did a good service. And it would be really stupid for the government to have disbanded it and not have it anymore. But then that changes the question. Does the government ever do anything stupid?
All the time.
So it's back to the point where I have to say, I really don't know.
Have you ever been approached by the government for contracts like that?
Not for contracts.
Okay, I'll leave that on it. I'll leave that. I won't follow up on that because unless somebody has a low IQ, they can figure that one out.
Yeah, like I say, I do police work, any government work, and all that pro bono. No contracts.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you again. This was fascinating. I mean, just the level of detail that you were able to provide on that story was.
I tend to shy away from the UFO question because it's so linked with the woo-woo, and I don't really want the remote viewing to be linked with the woo-woo. And so I generally stay away from it. But the fact is, if you can collect information about anything in time and space, UFOs are fair game. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, it's a lot for folks to process, which is why they should watch the episode before this one, because that provides the grounding that this is a real thing. It is grounded. We didn't talk about this, but I've talked about this with David Morehouse extensively. But it is grounded in quantum physics. There is a scientific grounding for it. I'm not sure how much more scientific work they've done on it, but there's still a lot that we don't understand about the nature of reality, and having an open mind is something that I think is critical. We don't know all the answers to everything. I mean, knowing what happens after death, right? Like, scientists don't know. They have no idea. And that's something that they should know. And the only way that you're going to get answers for this is if you're open to some of the data that's out. And it is data. Like, you look at near-death experiences. I'm sure there's a ton. I'm sure there's a ton of hoaxsters, et cetera. But you can't keep hearing the same story over time from credible people like doctors, PhDs, former military folks, and not think there's something to it. Now, is it something your mind's making up? It's possible. I'm not saying I don't think it's probable, but it's possible. But I think it's also possible that energy is neither created nor destroyed, right? Which is, it's a basic scientific principle. So if that's
and be coherent, yeah.
And if that's the truth, then what's the nature of consciousness, and how is consciousness? How much of it is physical? How much is non-physical? Is everything we know locked in our brain, or is it coming from the outside? Where do we get our ideas? Are we in? So anyway, that's a lot of things to unpack, but I think it's important for people to understand that. And I want to make sure that everyone should do their own homework and gain an understanding what's happened. But the successes of remote viewing are impossible to ignore. And if I were the CIA and I took over the program, I would say it's all hogwash, because the last thing I would want is every suburban mom having the ability to go to, attend a meeting at Langley from in a remote viewing session.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you very much. And I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.